Let's start with the idea of the state of Christianity today. So, you are currently pastoring a church, you have been for years. Um, I've read from some of the deep thinkers that we are at the end of a cycle, end of an era of Christianity, just like the end of a civilization. Not that it is over, but that something new has to take place. And it makes me think of B.D. Griffith, the great English monk who lived in India, who said, if Christianity does not recover its mystical dimension, it should pack up and go out of business. What are your thoughts on
that? I concur 100% with him, and I've ever since you told me that quote years ago, that has stuck in my mind because it's something that drives me. I feel very compelled to stay within the church, even though it is struggling greatly because of this reason, because it has been cut off from its spiritual roots. And I have been able to reconnect with those roots, not through Protestantism, even though I'm a United Church of Christ pastor. My roots are in United Methodism, and you and I both grew up in that in the mainline Christianity in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and it's when I went to seminary, and I was hungry. I was hungry for a deeper experience, and I didn't even know what that was. I just knew that there was a hunger. It's very much like the Matrix, you know, in terms of that movie, that you know something is there, you know there's something more to life. You're tired of going through the motions, and you see a church that is basically just a club. The church has turned into just another club. Was it something similar with your walk, because you've got such a rich history in the Fourth Way? Did you have to venture outside the church in order to come back in the church to find some relevancy? And if so, you know, you and I both, I've done a lot of social work and worked in a jail setting and worked with the homeless, mentally ill. Now here I am back in a pastoral setting. You've kind of had that same way too. What's been your experience in terms of trying to find that vitality of the inner life outside the church setting?
I was one of those who, in the 70s, definitely had to leave the church to go find meaning, answers, depth. I came out of a mainline Protestant church that was very politically motivated, very rationalist, and really didn't at any point touch the soul in any way that resonated, that gave that hunger, you know. I remember the summer of my 16th year, I went to Thésée, the Protestant monastic community, and that was my first real exposure to contemplative silence. And I spoke to the brothers and discovered within me a whole new dimension that had not been generated by the church I grew up in. So I knew it was there. And my father, when I was a child, took me to monasteries and cathedrals, and I instinctively sensed something. But Protestantism of that era was so dry, so devoid of it, and as I later discovered, aggressively against the inner life. Now, you know, perhaps in various pockets that's changing, but the old guard and the mindset of the leadership and even the form is such that it doesn't invite to the kind of humility, inner silence, mystical experience that is at the heart of Christianity. And discovering the mystics of the Catholic Church and then the Orthodox Church made me realize that the whole point was to soak us, drown us in a tangible dimension that is not of this world, and yet allows us to function in the world as enlightened people. Now, for me, the bridge back in from my journey into Eastern teachings, into esotericism, and ultimately into Gurdjieff and the Fourth Way, was through Thomas Merton in particular. He, through his masterful New Seeds of Contemplation especially, spoke in that lucid way that only one of the great writers on spirituality can speak, revealing to me that all of the practices and efforts towards higher consciousness that I recognized as transformative were present in the Christian way, and that it was all about that kind of awakening, expansive experience, regardless of what the external religion that we all grew up with presented. The issue is whether one can go back into the church with that knowledge, call upon its legacy, and revive it. All of that leads us to a place where we are historically at a crucial moment where Christianity has been hijacked by ignorance, literalism, manipulation, power, and for it to be found by those who've given up on it requires a real creative approach for a new era, really. And you and I know that within the churches we have found authentic mystics, Charles, the Goatman, even Robin, who were, but even they were outsiders in their own church. You know, Charles himself, 1,200 years of orthodoxy in his blood, and he was still.
He was a liberal in the Orthodox Church. I mean, really, yeah, he struggled. He greatly struggled with that and struggled in Protestantism. And, you know, he always felt like he was in exile. And to some extent, so am I. And you can speak for yourself, but I feel that way. I feel exiled from my spiritual homeland. I feel exiled even within my own church to some extent. And yet that does not drive me away from what I feel is my own personal calling. And my calling was very powerful when I was 22, and I had a spiritual experience before I even knew what was going on. And within 6 months, I had met Charles, and really was on a path, a very mythological path where people were actually physical signposts for me. I mean, they were actually there saying, go this way, go that way. And what I needed to do, instead of going away from it, I needed to stay. And I needed to be almost a missionary within Protestantism in order to be able to create safe space within churches, even though they're extremely toxic. The church that I'm in now is beautiful, beautiful church, beautiful people, and I'm not having any issues with any of that. But brother, I have had some issues in churches before, and very demonic issues, and very, very frightening issues in terms of just people possessing it. And like you said, just this is my place, and you can't come in here.
I had a case where someone had a problem with the word transformation. I don't know if we've spoken about that before, but a lifetime in church, they'd never heard the word transformation, and that really worried them. And they actually approached me and said, "What is this word? I've not heard it used before." You know, the idea of change, which is so fundamental from the old man to the new. I mean, it's right there.
I mean, I talked one time in a sermon about the Christ within, this archetypal sense of Christ within us. And I immediately was tagged as a new age preacher.
Of course, there's the reality of the great legacy of the ancient church that belongs to all of us. And I've been fascinated for a long time at the historical devolution of all of that and how we end up on the American frontier, completely cut off from all roots, not just the European roots that we came from, but
Yes.
the original Christian roots are so far removed that it's hopelessly disconnected, which is why we have the insanity that we see on television passing for Christianity. Or for that matter, the Pentecostal approach, which started in what 1911 in Toledo. I mean it,
Right.
or Topeka, Kansas, I should say. With an associate Methodist pastor looking for meaning. And they had nothing to go on, so they found it for themselves, and it couldn't possibly be uh, from the depths of the original teachings of the great traditions that St. John Chrysostom would have spoken to, and countless others, because none of that existed. None of that was in the English language. Uh, I may have said this before, but in 1972, I'm told there were 2 books in English on Orthodoxy. And thanks to Father Seraphim Rose, now there's this marvelous library of all the, of centuries of great teachers that stir the heart and soul and reveal to us a path, a methodology, a richness of being that is completely non-existent in Protestantism. The Quakers went looking for something, but they had nothing to build from. The Catholic Church has, so cut itself off. It amazes me that to this day on the radio, I'll hear a scholarly Catholic priest say that we are the original church, we're the ancient church, as though there's no such thing as orthodoxy, and immediately remove Saint Seraphim of Sarov, Saint Simeon the New Theologian, all of these that belong to us and that we need to reclaim, and that changes everything, because it's all about experiential transformation. It's all about this theosis that is so foreign to us still. And so there's so much to look, revisit, and experience in a new way without the associations that people have to the language. And that in itself is a great challenge for our time, because the walls are so high. There are so many wounded people.
Yeah, and that's one of the things the church, to some extent, is a spiritual hospital, and that's to some extent what I feel called to do, is just to be here and to try to create safe space, safe, sacred space for people to come and heal and um, find out that there is really an inner life here. That if you this is what you were pursuing, because there are a lot of people out there who have heard hints of this, whispers of it.
Mhm.
It is true that there is an inner life within Christianity that is exactly, you know, like Zen Buddhism. I mean, there is a path that we always heard of, but I never heard of it until I got to seminary. I mean, I spent 22 years in the church being a preacher's kid and hearing my dad preach and hearing about John Wesley and all this stuff. And I had never even heard of it. So when I met Charles Ashton, it just blew me away, and I'm like, this is the guy. When Paul says to pray without ceasing, the fact that no one besides Charles Ashton and then Robin and then you and the Getmans, the fact that no one had an answer to that was not fair.
Well, one of the summits for me of wisdom discovery through the Gottmans was in their book, Wisdom and Practices of the Ancient Faith, when they bring together when they marry together the vigilance, attention, and prayer as becoming one. Conscious, attentive presence becomes prayer. That's something that is a whole new ballgame, and brings together all of these traditions about mindfulness, self-awareness that we find in all the great philosophies and religious teachings, with that very Christian element of prayer. And to me, that's a quantum leap right there, when the simple thing of attention becomes a matter of connection with the holy, and of an inner state that is prayerful and receptive. Then we have a new human being walking the streets, and that's the hope of humanity right there. And that's what Christianity really is: ultimate mystical experience, because it's about the uncreated incarnating in a human being, and in all human beings who open themselves to it. And there are very few people who can shift off of their assumptions of what Christianity is to rediscover it on a level unimaginable to them. That's where orthodoxy has been very helpful to me, because it completely pulls you out of the culture and puts you in another world. In that incense, bowing before the icons, the whole physicality of it, the state of mind shift. We may have said this before in other places, but to be in that sanctuary, in the divine liturgy, and to hear the police sirens outside for a moment, you suddenly become aware there's that world on 16th Street. Yeah. All it does is make you realize that you've gone through a wormhole, that you're in a whole other dimension, which will go out to the world and help it, but is completely unrelated to what the world thinks reality is. And that's what needs to suffuse human lives. I was going to say society. That will never happen, because it has to be one human being at a time. We know that even in Orthodoxy, which is the carrier of this ultimate mystical tradition, there is rigidity, intolerance, mean-spiritedness, political infighting, all of the same old, because humans will default to their lower selves. So the focus that we put, in that Charles, Robin, the Gottmans, George Maloney, so many other wonderful people that we have personally known, on that real discipline, and return to actively working on one's inner being, one's cleansing, one's purification, one's transparency to the divine, is what's going to keep all this reality emerging, represent Christianity in a new way.